Hello and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to look at the pile of stuff we have here. Well, not so much the pile of stuff, it's kind of that time of the season again when people are recreating things. They're recreating things like the ZX Spectrum. If anyone's out there, they can recognize this machine. It's the recreated ZX Spectrum. It was a bit of a dud, it was a bit of a flop. I mean, although it looked the part and it was a really nice recreation of the keyboard and case, but that's virtually all it was. It was a Wi-Fi case. Then we have Sony and its PlayStation, the little PlayStation Classic, which it got quite lambasted within the kind of retro community when it first came out, but I'm kind of guessing that people really didn't take to it because they didn't know what to expect. And this has been one of the kind of mainstays of my little ones, because they, you just plug it in, you select your game and off you go, and you've got a classic PlayStation game. And it's been very well used, this little machine, so it's not as bad as people made out. And I think it got a bit of an undue reputation really from people who kind of looking at it with very, very rose tinted glasses. But it was a good little machine overall, and it stood the test of time. It's a couple of years down the line and this thing still runs perfectly. The next one was the 64 Mini. There was kind of two versions of it out there. There was the original one, which is unboxed on the top, and there's the one still wrapped up in cellophane, which was the updated 64. And they did a little bit of tweaking here and there with it to accept new images and new programs and to be a lot easier on the memory keys, memory sticks and so on, but it's virtually the same unit really. And then we come on to the Commodore 64, the Maxi, the Max, Commodore 64 Max, the Maxi, the C64, whichever way you want to look at it. And it was quite a nice machine really. It recreated the look and the feel of the original Commodore 64, and it was so much nicer than the Mini, not only to use but to look at, to be able to use it for other things other than games, and it was quite a nice machine. And then the actual stretching the point came about, which was the VIC-20. Now, it wasn't a huge success when compared to the 64 and the Mini, but it was nice to have the option. I think if they just given you the option to start off with, whether you wanted a VIC-20 or a 64 style case, then that would have been much nicer, rather than trying to kind of eke out a little bit more out of the moldings that they produced for the Commodore 64 and just change the color and make it into a VIC-20, which is more or less what they did, because they can run the same stuff. They both do exactly the same. But then again, it was nice to have the option, and I understand why they did it, and I appreciate that a lot of people were looking for the VIC-20 style option. It would have been quite nice if they did the +4, and the +4 machine would have made it quite a nice alternative to these two, because there is quite a few bits of +4 software which is very good, and it kind of shows up the 64 in some areas and what it could actually do, and it would have been nice to have it. Now the +4 would have made a nice addition to these as a collector's point of view, and it wouldn't have been that much difficult, apart from the case and the the remap membrane keyboard that they actually have underneath the keys on these, and it would have been quite a nice addition. But they didn't do that. They didn't do a 128 version. They didn't go down that route. They jumped straight in, feet first, for the Commodore Amiga, the A500. Now, undoubtedly there was a place for all of these. Not so sure about the recreated ZX Spectrum, but the 64s, the VIC-20, the 64 Minis, and even the PlayStation. There was also Nintendo's Minis and all of the other retro Minis that were out there at the time. And they do make nice additions, because just plugging in a Commodore 64, the Maxi version, into a HDMI TV, selecting your game or plugging in a memory key, and you're away playing your nostalgia games in minutes. Or for a lot of people, they're new to this, and they're away playing the classic and vintage games that these machines could run, you know. And that was the same for the PlayStation and the Mini to a certain extent. Now, the Amiga, on the other hand, the Amiga 500, is a very different beast. Now, I'm just going to, by the magic of video, I'm going to clear these away, and we're going to have a look at the Amiga 500 and see why and where I'm coming from. Okay, and it's something that a lot of the pre-production models is out in a few days. There's a lot of pre-production ones out there which have been given to people to try out and test out and so on. They're nearly all, in fact they all say exactly the same. It's like they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all saying exactly the same about the model. They're all saying exactly the same about what it is. They're all having exactly the same opinions. Now, I'm not in the same camp, and there's a big reason for that, which we'll come to next. So let's carry on with this and I'll show you why. Okay, so before we have a quick look at my reasons why, we're going to have a quick look at the videos or clips from videos that people who've already reviewed the Amiga A500 Mini and what they had to say. And this is a quick rundown of what they all had to say about this machine. The first thing is, wow, it looks cute.
Wow.
So cute. Cute indeed.
This thing. And well, there it is. If that isn't the cutest thing I've ever seen, I don't know what is.
And there it is. We open it and the first thing we see is the A500. And that is so cute.
The second thing is, ooh, doesn't the music sound great on the intro? Then they comment about the games and they run through the games that is on the machine. They then tell you how it's built and what's inside the machine, and you know, it's just an ARM board with a couple of weights and basically a molded plastic case, but this is what they have to say.
Okay, and here we are. It's a pretty small little board, as I suspected. Also, I noticed they added metal weights to the bottom, which helps it to be heavy enough to stay in one place.
And most of them agree, in fact all of them agree, that it's a very nice little machine and it does what you want. You can plug a keyboard into it, you can add more software on a USB stick and so on. But not one of them is given a critique. Now I'm going to do it from two sides. I'm going to basically put my thoughts around the Amiga 500 Mini and my thoughts around what it should be and my thoughts around the fact that I've had one and I built one 2 years ago and it's sat on the bench here and it runs in a very, very similar manner, and it was quite lazy really for what they've actually done with it, and I'll explain that as I kind of go along. Now, this machine is my 500 recreated Amiga 500. It's not an Amiga 500 really, it's an Amiga 500 case, keyboard, and it's got a Pi inside, and it's got a USB keyboard converted to allow the original keyboard to run nicely on the Raspberry Pi, and that's really all there is to it, apart from extra USB sockets that I've actually added onto the machine in the forms of a USB hub and, you know, a genuine power supply rather than a cable and a plug-in standard USB type power supply. So really that's about it, and as you can see it boots up and it runs straight into Workbench. Now you can play around with the Workbench and have it set anywhere you like, and this machine will just run as an Amiga 500, 1200 plus, 4000, 1000 and so on. It'll do all of the Amiga range because it's based on exactly the same system as the new Amiga 500 Mini, although it hasn't been polished to give you that kind of carousel front end. It's just straight into what you would see on an original Amiga, and that's what I like. That's how I did it. Now everything else is the same. It runs the same, it sounds the same. It uses, well, I'm using an optical mouse, which is very good, and it's very, very responsive on the screen. And for all intents and purposes, it's just an Amiga. Okay, so if I go to games and I use the mouse, go to games, and let's find something to run. And you get the choices, obviously, with this software, of the ECS version or the AGA version and so on. And as you can see, it runs just like a standard Amiga, and you can configure the Amiga to run the way you want it to run. And it's just as it is. It's an Amiga 500, 1200, 1000, 4000, so on, 600 if you want it to be as well. And it does really, really well. And I've had, as you can hear from the sound, I've had quite a lot of fun with this little machine, and it's nice just to pull it out to play on it, or to let the little ones play on it, rather than having to give them a machine that's actually an original that can be damaged quite easily. Now this is, other than something dropping on the case, etc., it's not really going to get damaged that easily, and it looks the part. I sprayed it black for a reason, because it's not an original 500, but it very easily could be repainted or stripped back to its original color, and then it would look exactly like it should do. Now it runs fantastically well, and as you can see, this is where you can configure the entire machine, from, you know, the version you want to the memory you want to use on it, whether you want, you know, extra memory, chip memory, slow memory, etc. Whether you want to use the USB for your controllers, or use the 9-pin joystick ports, which I've integrated on this board as well, so we can use a proper standard 9-pin joystick, and you can also use a proper standard Amiga mouse, but like most people, prefer an optical one. So yeah, so this is the Amiga 500 recreated over 2 years ago, and that's why I'm not so impressed with so far with the reviews on the Amiga 500 Mini. I've got an open mind about it. I would like it to be good. I actually have one which I pre-ordered, should arrive very shortly, and it would be nice to have a look at it, but I'm not going down the same route as, wow, isn't this fantastic, isn't it so nostalgic, and so on and so forth, because the original Commodore 64 Mini, or the C64 Mini, because they're not allowed to use the official Commodore badging, I believe, was quite a good novelty. It was a good little console that you could plug and play. It would probably beat, you know, setting up a Raspberry Pi to do it, you know, in a way, because it was quick, it was easy, it was already there, and you just had to plug it in and use it. You didn't have to configure anything, no SD cards, which is a plus. But from a perspective of a usability standpoint, it was pretty much not very usable, because you had to plug in a USB keyboard if you wanted to do anything with it, because the on-screen keyboard was appalling for games. You couldn't really use it that way. You then had to think about using it in a different way, so virtually it was just a small console, which really, it didn't matter if it was in a Commodore 64 style printed box, or just a standard black or white printed box, because you weren't using it as a Commodore 64, you were using it as an emulated machine. Now this is what this is, but it's inherently and eminently much better than I believe the Mini's going to be, the A500 Mini, because it's useful. You can use it, you can program on it, you can do your sound, your video, your graphics, you can do Lightwave, Imagine, all that kind of stuff on it, and it will run fantastically well. When they brought out the Maxi, or the C64, the full-size version, that became a usable machine. That became a machine that the 64 Mini should have been. And for most people, it was. And it was a great machine. It was good to use. It had a half-decent keyboard. It looked the part. It even felt the part when you were using it. And it brought back more of a nostalgic kind of memory for people, and also it allowed new people to get involved in the Commodore and retro computing domain, because you could go online, download a programming language, download something that you wanted to learn on it. You could download anything you wanted to use for it that you would have normally done on a standard Commodore 64. You could go to companies like Cytronic and download the games. You know, you could buy the originals as well as download their versions of the game to run on your full-size Commodore 64 or the C64 variant. So it was a good machine. Now the A500, I can see why people kind of swoon over it and go, oh, doesn't it look great, and isn't it fantastic, and aren't the games nostalgic, and so on. Now the 8-bit guy kind of got a little bit more of a kind of a steadier review of it, because he looked into the games.
So let's talk about these included games for a moment. Of course, it was pointed out to me that many of the games that were popular in the USA were not popular in Europe, and vice versa.
And a lot of them, he didn't know, a lot of them were European games. People forget that the Amiga and the C64 predominantly were kind of European machines. The gaming industry around those machines was led predominantly by the UK and Europe, and that was the same for the 500. So a lot of the games on there are going to be games that people don't recognize, such as the 8-bit guy. He had a few that he realized and he played with, but other than that, you know, the rest of them were predominantly kind of European style games. And that's where it's always going to fall down, bundling games with machines. It was the same way the PlayStation Classic fell down, because a lot of people didn't like the games it was bundled with because they wanted something else. So I'm hoping that I'm going to get some use out of the A500 Mini, and I'm hoping it's going to be a very good little machine. I've got a feeling that it's not going to be long before I take it apart and maybe do what I've done to this one. Maybe if it stands up to this one in the way it's set up, and you can get it to boot straight into the workbench, and you can get it to look and feel and act like a proper Amiga, then the internals out of this, the Raspberry Pi internals, may be coming out, and I may be replacing them with the Mini. The internals out of the Amiga Mini I might put into here, but we'll see, because this is a very, very stable platform, and at the end of the day I can't see any real difference between the two, you know, the way they're laid out, apart from, you know, the usability side of it with the size and the keyboard and the looks and the feel and etc. So yeah, it remains to be seen, and I'm going to have a bit of a play with it when I get it. I might not do a review on it, because I think maybe there's been too many glowing reviews on it that actually I might do a review on it, because there's been so many glowing reviews on it, and it was the same with the 64 Mini and the 64, that the shortcuts and the shortcomings, and you know, they were all glossed over, and that's not how it should be. Now let's hope it's as good as, you know, it's made out to be. I'm kind of guessing not, but we'll find out. But then again, I'm basing it on this, so let's keep the minis and the retro scene going, but let's make them a little bit more of a usable machine. Let's get rid of the mini side of it, because the cost of the Amiga Mini is the same cost, in fact slightly more, than the Commodore 64 Maxi was, or the C64 was, and for that you get much more of a machine, a better package, more usable, and it's a lot nicer machine altogether. Now, I don't understand why they brought the Mini out first in the A500. I can see why in the 64, because it was testing the waters, but the A500 should have been brought out like this from day one, because it is the same cost as they would be charging roughly for the full-size version, in a blown plastic case and a membrane style key-capped keyboard. And I can't see any reason why they shouldn't have gone down that route in the first place, and I believe they would have sold a lot more off the bat, because this is what people are looking for. Unless it's cynical, unless it's let's get them hooked with the Mini and then we'll sell them a bigger one. But I think by that time the people who really wanted the bigger one would have hacked about the Mini to get what they wanted without waiting, and I think they will have lost a lot of customers because of that. And certainly that would be me. I mean, it wouldn't take much to get a Leonardo Arduino and basically cobble together the keyboard to work on the USB port of the Mini. Now, they're the options, but you know, let's see, let's find out. I'm hoping it's going to be as good as people say, but not so sure. So anyway, this is a bit of a kind of more of a podcasty type thing rather than an out and out retro episode. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on the A500 Mini, because I've kept them till now, because most of you who've been watching this channel, I mean, there's 235 or 36 videos out there now that I've done in the last sort of 24, just over 24 months. And if you've been watching from fairly early on, you'll have seen this machine getting built, and you've seen the amount of time and effort that's went into this machine, and also how faithfully it kind of recreates the original Amiga. And that was the whole point of this, way before, you know, the marketing team jumped on the let's recreate the Amiga bandwagon. I believe the Amiga's not the right format for that because of its split two-part Kickstart and Workbench operating system. I also believe that the Atari ST would have been a nicer format to do. And remember, there were 5 million or thereabouts Atari ST sold, predominantly in Europe and the UK, and it was a huge hit in Germany and other such countries within Europe, and it would have been a fantastic machine to actually get rolling. So I think that the Atari ST should have been the next model, rather than this kind of split system that they use on the Amiga, because it's very difficult to get everything running all of the time on the system and the software that they're using for this and the A500 Mini, where the Atari ST, the baseline ST, could be used for 90% of the software, and they would have had a much bigger software base and user base for that reason. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe, and I'll see you again.